We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Yudam and Aleph and Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 110a. The Gemara is discussing Rav's position in terms of, let's say you have a katana who she gets married and then she grows up. So do we say automatically the kiddushin becomes a deoraisa kiddushin, or do we say no, only after the act of bia, only after the act of relations is the kiddushin going to become a deoraisa level kiddushin? And so the Gemara brought this opinion of Rav, and the Gemara now says, my Lav, is Rav not saying the lobal, that even if there was no act of relations, still we're going to say that it's going to be a deoraisa kiddushin, as Rashi over here says, my Lav the lobal rishon misha gadla? Isn't Rav saying that the case over here is the first person who married her, he did not have relations with her when she became an adult? Rav, and Rav is saying, this was a machlokas Rav and Shmuel on the previous Amud, and Rav is saying, let's say she takes a kiddushin from a second person, eino tzricha get misheni, she does not need a get from that second individual. Why? Dechalu kiddushin harishonim kishagadla, because the original kiddushin was chal automatically when she became an adult, therefore she was already a married woman, and therefore there's nothing to the second kiddushin whatsoever. Isn't that what Rav was saying on the previous Amud? And therefore you see that according to Rav, really even without an act of bia, we're going to say automatically the kiddushin will become a kiddushin on a doraisa level. And the Gemara says, no, that's not necessarily what Rav meant over there. Debal, it could be Rav is talking about a situation where there was an act of relations when she was an adult, and that's why the kiddushin is a full kiddushin. As Rashi over here says, Kishaboa lefigach eina tzricha get misheni. That's why she doesn't need to get from the second person according to Rav. The beila shabal harishon mishagad lo stam l'shem kiddushin iskavin, because when that first husband has relations with her when she's an adult, mistama, that is l'shem kiddushin. Diodea haya she'in kiddushay katana klum, because he knew that the kiddushin that existed when she was a minor, when she was a katana, it was not anything. But the Gemara says, if that is the case, if the situation is that there was an act of bia, so then my time of the Shmuel, then the Shmuel's position doesn't make sense, because Shmuel says she does require a get from the second person, meaning to say the kiddushin of the second individual is chal, but if there was relations with the first one, so wouldn't we say that the kiddushin was good with the first person, and therefore the first husband is going to be the real kiddushin, and the second one should be nothing? So what's the reason of Shmuel if they had relations? And so the Gemara answers no, because Shmuel holds kol haboel al das kiddushin harishonim hu boel. When the person, that first husband, has relations with her, he's having it on the understanding of the first kiddushin when she was still a minor. He's not saying that this is a new kiddushin of a doraisa level. It's just a continuation of the first kiddushin, and therefore it's only a kiddushin on a derabanan level, even after an act of bia, according to Shmuel. And the Gemara continues, but didn't they already argue about this a different time? In other words, this machlokas Rav and Shmuel over here, talking about a ketana who grows up, becomes an adult, and then we're questioning what happens with her second kiddushin that she receives from a second husband. Really, we had a similar machlokas already before between Rav and Shmuel. The Itmar, because we have the following machlokas Amoraim, Rav and Shmuel, Kidsha al Tanai, the case is as follows. Let's say he does a kiddushin with her on some kind of a condition. However, then then he marries her stam, meaning he has relations with her, and he marries her without fulfilling that condition. So Rav says, tzricha heimenu get. Rav says she requires from him a get. In other words, Rav says that act of bia undoes the need for any kind of fulfilling of the condition, and we say that the kiddushin is in fact chal. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, no, eino tzricha heimenu get. She does not need a get from him. The condition was not fulfilled, and therefore there was no condition. And therefore there was no kiddushin. Rashi over here says, al tanai she'eino lenidorim o mumin, some kind of condition that she doesn't have any oaths upon herself, or she doesn't have any blemishes, whatever it was. V'chinsa stam, but then he marries her stam. V'yachar kach nimtzu lenidorim tzricha get debia l'shem kiddushin havoy. Then we find out the condition is not fulfilled. Let's say she has nidorim, she has oaths on her. So then again, according to Rav, she is going to require a get, because we're going to say that act of relations when he married her is l'shem kiddushin. Diodea haya she'en kiddushin harishonim. He knew all along that the first kiddushin was nothing, and this was really a new kiddushin. In other words, Rav is saying the same thing. Rav is essentially saying what we said in Rav before. We said in Rav before, when you have the case of the minor who grows up and then she has bia, we say that bia is l'shem a new kiddushin, because he knew all along the first kiddushin was nothing. But if that's the case, that's exactly what Rav is saying over here. He's saying the first kiddushin was al tanai, he knew it was nothing, and therefore the kinsa stam, that act of marriage, that act of bia, was like a new kiddushin. And Shmuel saying the exact opposite. Shmuel saying get, because we say, like Shmuel said over here, al das kiddushin harishonim hu boel. It's all really just a continuation of the first kiddushin, and if it was understood that it was al tanai, therefore it's not going to be a kiddushin, even if it's kinsa stam, even if he goes ahead and marries her afterwards. And so the Gemara is really asking, saying, if that's the case, it would seem to be it's a repeat of the same exact machlokas amoraim. Rav Amar, the Gemara now explains the machlokas. Rav says tzricha himenu get. Rav says she requires a get from him. Why? Because kevan denasu. Because when he marries her, he's undoing all of those conditions. Again, like we said, it's like a new act of kedushin, a new act all over again. U'Shmuel Amar eina tzricha himenu get. But Shmuel says there's no requirement for a get because kol haboel adas kedushin rishonim hu boel. Because anyone who has relations, it's really just a continuation of the understanding of the first kedushin, and therefore the Gemara is really asking this as a question. If we're explaining the machlokas on the previous Amud in this fashion, why would Rav and Shmuel argue about the same thing 2 times? And the Gemara says, no, tzricha, we would actually need both cases, even though it seems like they're arguing about the same thing. You need both examples. Di itmar hahi, because if we only had that case, bahi kama Rav mishum diika tana, because in the case of the condition, there is a condition over there that was not fulfilled. V'kevan debal achle l'tanai. So there it's understandable, with the act of relations, he's undoing the tanai. Aval b'ha, but over here in a situation of a minor, maybe Rav would admit to Shmuel that it's al das kiddushin harishonim, that's really just a continuation of the original kiddushin. And the Gemara continues along the same lines in the other direction when it comes to Shmuel. V'itmar b'ha, if we only had Shmuel saying it in that case of the situation of the girl that is a minor, b'hach kamar Shmuel, so I would say only in that case Shmuel says that it's al das the kiddushin harishonim. Aval b'hach, but let's say it comes to the situation of Tanai, ema modele l'Rav, I might say that Shmuel admits to Rav, and Shmuel says that it does undo the Tanai. So tzricha. So again, that's why we need both cases for Shmuel as well. And we'll take a look at Rashi over here, and we should just note that Rashi has a different girsa in our Gemara. In our Gemara, the girsa is that if I only had that case of the Tanai, only over there, Rav would say that you undo the Tanai, but he would not necessarily say the same thing by the case of the girl that is a minor. Rashi has it the opposite. Di'itmar b'ha gabe ketana. If Rav only said it by the case of the minor, shalomiano, b'ha kamar Rav dasakadai livo l'shem kiddushin mishagadlo misham deleka Tanai. On the contrary, there Rav says that it's a new kiddushin because there is no Tanai, and the guy realizes, though, that he needs to do a new kiddushin. Ein psul kiddushin rishonim misham Tanai ela misham kanas, because he understands that the original kiddushin was no good because she was a minor. V'adam yodeh shem kiddushin rishonim klum v'chazru b'al l'shem kiddushin. So it's the opposite. In other words, Rav would have only said it maybe by the case of the minor. Aval bahi de'ika Tanai, but in a situation of a Tanai, ema model l'shmuel. So then maybe Rav would admit to Shmuel and say that it's not like a new kiddushin. Ve'adai the Tanai b'al, and the act of relations actually was a continuation of the original kiddushin. Kesavar sheino lenedar and v'kaima Tanai shebeneim, because the person thought that actually she did not have any oaths upon her, and therefore the Tanai still needs to be fulfilled. And if the Tanai is not fulfilled, therefore it's not going to be a good kiddushin. And again, according to this girsa of Rashi, it's going to be the reverse logic in Shmuel as well. But the point is the same. The point is that you need both cases of the machlokas Rav and Shmuel. And the Gemara continues, Umi amar Rav ki bo alini lo bo alo. But does Rav really say that when you have a situation of a katana, of a girl that's a minor, so we only say the kiddushin becomes a kiddushin at a doraisa level when there's actually relations, and if there's no relations when she's an adult, it is not going to be a kiddushin. V'ahi uvda to have it been nerish, but there was a case that happened in nerish. Ve'akdisha kashi katana. Again, the kiddushin took place when she was a katana, when she was a minor. It was just a derabanan kiddushin. V'godla, and then she became an adult. V'oz ve'abei kursi, and they put her into the bridal chair, and then some other person came along and he snatched the bride away from the original husband. Rav Brona, Rav Chananel, Talmidei de Rav Havu Hasam, and Rav Brona and Rav Chananel, who were students of Rav, they were there. And they did not require her to get a get from that second man. In other words, they said even though there was no act of relations, she was only sitting in the bridal chair, they didn't actually consummate the marriage. Still, they said that the marriage to the first husband is a doraisa marriage, and the marriage to the second one, the one who snatched her up, is nothing. And so therefore you see, on the contrary, you don't need any act of bia in order to make it a good kiddushin. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Rapapa says, Bin neresh minsav nesivi v'hadar mosve abei korsais. It's actually a neresh. They did it the opposite. First they would consummate the marriage, so there was an act of relations in this case, and then they would seat her in the bridal chair, and that's why that second person who came along, his marriage to her was nothing. The Gemara gives an alternative answer. Ravashi says, Huasa shelo kahogan, he, the second person, did something inappropriate, he snatched her. Lafikach asubo shelo kahogan, therefore we deal with him inappropriately. V'afki inu rabbanan, Rabbanan l'kiddushin minei. In other words, the Rabbanan have no problem undoing his kiddushin. Really, his kiddushin should have been a good kiddushin, because the first person never consummated the marriage. But nevertheless, the Chachamim have the ability to undo a kiddushin, and therefore they undo that second kiddushin because of his inappropriate actions. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Ravina le Ravashi, so Ravina said to Ravashi, Teinach de Kaddish bekaspa. I understand if the kiddushin was done with money, so then it's possible using Hefker Bezdin. Hefker, Rashi says, for the Chachamim, for the Bezdin, to undo the kiddushin, they undo that kesef kiddushin. But Kaddish bebiyah, mai, what are you going to say in a situation where the kiddushin was done with an act of relations? There's no Hefker Bezdin Hefker when it comes to relations. So how do they undo the kiddushin of the second man? And the Gemara answers, Shavi Rabbanan lebilas, so bilas nus. The Rabbanan are able to render that act of relations as a beilas nus, as an action of zenus. And again, all kedushin are done through the knowledge of the bezdin, and therefore they can undo the kedushin in that situation. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Halacha Rabbi Eliezer. The halacha in terms of the Mishnah follows the position of Rabbi Eliezer. Rashi says, Rabbi Eliezer, the Melamdin Hakatana Lemoin. We teach the girl that's a minor to do a refusal in a situation where there's a yibam that's supposed to be done with her sister. Again, there's a problem of marrying sisters. So if the person, the yavam, happens to be married to the sister of the widow, but the sister is a minor, so we instruct her that she should do miyun, and that way the yibam can continue. V'chein Amar Rabbi Elazar, and similarly, that's what Rabbi Elazar says. Halacha Rabbi Eliezer. The halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer in our Mishnah. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Mishaya Nasoi L'shtei Yisomos Ketanos. Let's say you have an individual who's married to two orphans who are minors, meaning to say you have a situation where there are two wives and they're both derabanan marriages, v'meis, and then he dies. So bi'aso chalitzasa shel achas mehem poteres sarasa. The act of relations or the chalitza of one of them is enough to pater the co-wife, meaning if the brother comes along and does yibum with one of them, or if he does chalitza with one of them, that will pater the other one. V'chein shtei charashos, and the same is going to be true. Let's say the two wives, they're not minors, but let's say they're both deaf mutes. Again, those are both derabanan marriages. They're both marriages at the same level, and so therefore you only have to do the yibum or the chalitza with one of them. Now, ketana v'chareshes, let's say he has two wives, one of them is a minor, and one of them is a deaf mute. So they're both derabanan marriages, but they're different kinds of derabanan marriages. So there, ein bias achas mehen poteres sarasa. There, the relations with one of them is not going to pater the co-wife, because they're considered to be two different statuses, even though they are both derabanan marriages. And the Mishnah continues, Pikachas v'chareshes. Let's say you have a case of a man who's married to two wives. One of them is a woman who has das, and the other one is a deaf mute. So in other words, the first marriage is a doraisa marriage, the other one is only a derabanan marriage. So then, bias hapikachas, if you have relations with the one that was a doraisa level, poteres hachareshes, that would take care of the one that's the deaf mute, that's only the derabanan. The doraisa would take care of the derabanan. In other words, let's say you have a situation where the husband dies, and the brother-in-law does yibum with the pikachas, that would be fine. However, ve'ein bias hachareshes poteres etzah pikachas. But let's say he goes ahead and he has bia, he does the yibum with the chareshes, with the woman that's a deaf mute, that is not going to pater her co-wife, who is the pikachas. Similarly, gedola katana. Let's say you have a man that's married to a gedola and a katana. He's married to an adult woman and to a girl. So bias hagedola poteres hakatana. The bia, the relations with the adult, is going to pater the minor. Ve'ein bias hakatana poteres hagedola. But the bia with the minor is not going to pater the adult. And the Gemara says, "V'chareshes bas chalitzahi." But is it really true that a chareshes, a deaf mute, who is a woman, is able to have chalitza? Rashi over here says, "V'chareshes bas chalitzahi the katani masnisin v'chein shtei charashes." The Mishnah says the same is true when you're talking about two deaf mutes, and they mentioned chalitza there at the beginning of the Mishnah. But is that really true? V'atanan, but we learned in the Mishnah, cheresh shenechlatz. Let's say you have a man that's a deaf mute who does chalitza, or v'chareshes shecholza, or let's say you have a woman that's a deaf mute that does chalitza. Or let's say you have a woman that takes chalitza from a minor, from a boy that's a minor, chalitza so psula. In all of these cases, the chalitza is psula. And the idea over here is that the deaf mute is not able to speak, and there are things that need to be recited when it comes to the ceremony of chalitza. And so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Gidol Amar Rav. Rav Gidol says the name of Rav, a very simple answer, Abiyah. That part of the Mishnah, when it talks about the two charashas, is not talking about chalitza anymore. It's saying it's the same thing in terms of biyah, in terms of, let's say they would do yibum, so then we would say the halach is the same. Just like if you have two girls that are minors, the biyah with one of them paters the other. So too, if you have two girls who are both deaf mutes, so the biyah with one of them will pater the other. Rava Amar Rava says, Afilu tema chalitza. No, you could even say we're going on chalitza, but there is a possibility of chalitza by a deaf mute. How? no, because kan bechareshes meikara, because over here in our Mishnah, we're talking where the two deaf mutes, it was from the beginning they were deaf mutes, meaning since the original marriage was already derabanan by both of them, so then we allow the chalitza as well, because it's all at the same derabanan level. However, kan bepikachas v'achagach nischarsha. But here we're talking about when we say that there is no chalitza by a deaf mute, that's talking about where the marriage was on a deoraisa level. In other words, she was a pikachas at the time of the marriage, and so now she's falling to chalitza at the time that she's falling to do the yibum or the chalitza, so then she's already a deaf mute. So in such a situation, she's not able to recite the proper verses that are recited at the chalitza ceremony, and therefore it's not going to be good because there's a chiyuv on a doraisa level. The original marriage was doraisa, and the chalitza is not going to be effective. And the Gemara says, chareshes meikara, if she's a chareshes meikara, so kihechi de'al hachi nafak, the same way she goes into the marriage, meaning it's only the rabbanan marriage, that's the same way she can go out of the marriage, that's why it's no problem. But pikachas v'achakach nischarsha, but again, if she was a pikachas at the time of the marriage, so it was a doraisa marriage, and only later she became nischarsha, she became a deaf mute, so then chalitza is not going to be good to ma'akev b'kriya, because then already the kriya, the recitation of the psukim is ma'akev, she's not able to do the recitation of the psukim, so it's not going to be a good chalitza. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Abaya asks the following question, V'chareshes meikara bas chalitzi, but is that really true? Is a chareshes, let's say she was a chareshes from the outset, is she really able to do chalitza like we're saying? V'atanan, but we learned in a Mishnah, Shnei achin, let's say you have two brothers, Echad b'ikeach v'echad cheresh, one of them is a b'ikeach and one of them is a deaf mute. Nisuin l'shtei nachrios, and they're married to two women who are not related. Achas pikachas v'achas chareshes, one of them is a pikachas and one of them is a chareshes. This is two brothers married to two girls, and again, by the brother who is a pikeach is married to the pikachas, the brother who's a cheresh is married to the chereshes. Meis cheresh, baal chereshes. So now if the cheresh dies, the deaf mute, who is the husband of the woman that's a deaf mute, if he dies, so ma yasa pikeach baal pikachas, so what should the pikeach do? Again, he's the one that's married to the pikachas. So the halach is kones, the halach is he can marry her, he's able to do yibum with her. And if he wants to divorce her, he can divorce her as well. And the Mishnah continues, Meis pikech bal pikachas. What if it's the other way around? Let's say you have a situation where the pikeach dies, who is the husband of the pikachas. So ma yasa cheresh bal chareshes. So now what should the deaf mute husband do? He's the husband again of the woman that's the deaf mute. So over there, the halach is kones, he is able to marry her. Ve'eno mosi liolam, but he can never divorce her. And the reasoning for that is that a cheresh is not able to divorce a woman, because again, it's not considered that he has das, so therefore he's able to do the yibum, but he's not able to divorce her. And in any case, the Gemara continues, my love is it not, b'chareshes meikara. When we're talking about the situation of the chareshes, wasn't she a chareshes from the outset? From the beginning she was a chareshes, and it seems like the only option that the Mishnah is giving is yibum. The katani kones in, we're saying you can marry her, but apparently there is no option of chalitza, even though she's a chareshes meikara. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Amud Beis.